Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff, I did some quick math, and that's always a dangerous ground, but even at your average collection of, which I took as I just basically averaged the BLS and the ALS and came out around $492. And 80% of that, that month of April, where we did 43 over the previous year, 43 turf calls over the previous year, that my math says that comes out to a minimum of $21,000 in additional revenue. Here or there somewhere. And I don't think, even if Kenny's estimates are wildly high, we're not talking about making a killing here. We're talking about enough to support 1 or 2 additional paramedics. And at that rate, and again, what's the budget figure for overtime in the mayor's proposed budget for the fire department? 200 again. And this year we exhausted that plus the ARA grant? But there is also, I think you did something with training overtime as well. You move things around, did you not?
Training overtime is acceptable.
Okay, so that's effectively additional overtime money in it. And how much was that, do you remember? Okay. So, okay, so realistically, based on past history, when do you expect the overtime to run out? That's true, but you do have history to go on. And how much do we spend total from all sources for overtime in FY through March 29? What was the total we spent in FY11?
In FY11
to date for overtime.
We spent $245 out of the general fund, not including training overtime.
Right.
And I don't know how much of the overtime of the SAFER grant was spent in 11.
But what was the total on the SAFER grant? It was 288. Say again?
The total of the grant is 388.
So that's almost, say 500-600. I know it's not apples and apples, but it's a big number.
No, part of that was 72,000 for the cost.
Oh, that's right. One of the paramedics was paid out of that. Okay, so we're down around 400, let's say. Okay. And we don't have that much in. So presumably we're probably going to run out earlier, which means more turf calls. And at this rate, I mean, I don't think you have to have a lot of months when you run short to pay for another paramedic, possibly 2. I mean, I don't know if we can get $500,000 out of it, but I wonder if we can get 140,000 or something like that, simply by, even at the rate of collection and at the lower rate. Can we envision getting enough for a couple of paramedics? I mean, I think that's the essential question. I mean, there's high numbers, there's low numbers, but what's a reasonable number?
I think my response to that would be that, say we spent $400,000 in fiscal year 11, right? We didn't produce any significantly more increased volume of money than we did in fiscal year 10. If you look at the data on the chart, which I agree with, we came up with $965,000 in fiscal 10, and in fiscal year 9, and this is the discussion that I was having with some of the members of the fire union. I forget what day it was now, maybe Monday or Tuesday. Monday. You only collected $926,000 in fiscal year 09. Okay, so we spent more in fiscal year 11 probably than we spent in fiscal. I think we spent, if my recollection is correct, $222,000 in overtime in fiscal year 09. Without a SAFER grant, now we might have had more people, and that's why I'm saying we have to look at the numbers. And as I think we agreed the other day, the numbers of people on shift determines what you're going to make. So how you get those number of people on shift is what we have to, that's what my recommendation is to work with someone who can help us look through the numbers and deal with the numbers as they are actual. What we're going to collect based on our percentages, how can we increase that? I mean, we don't really have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sander, we don't really have an aggressive collection on things that go through the 4 notifications. we won't realize much more additional revenue probably once we've gone through that and done our due diligence on that. But we're going to have write-offs. We wrote off several $100,000 a couple of years ago. I think there's a proposal for another couple $100,000 tonight. So we're going to have those write-offs. We're not going to realize 100% of our revenue. I think we all agree on that. It's how many bodies show up. And really, I mean, I think this comes down to, without getting into negotiations, discretionary days and how many people show up to work. And I'm not involved in negotiations, so I don't know all of the banter that's gone back and forth about that. But I will say that the number of people on shift determine how many ambulances we run, and that's what we have to work out. So you're not going to get, I mean, we've even in those periods increased from Medicare plus 80 in 2000, before last year this time, a year back we were Medicare plus 80. This year in June we went to Medicare plus 120. So we've had the same number of calls almost exactly for the last 3 years. Our BLS total calls of our calls that we've actually serviced and billed, it's almost 50-50 BLS and ALS per the report that I got for the last 4 years from Comstar. So if you look at the total BLS calls and the total ALS1, we don't do that many ALS2, I don't think. But we have almost 50% BLS, 50% ALS. So if you look at that data and you look at each year, I mean, 1 year was exactly 2,000, 1 year was 1998 runs. The next year that billable runs, we had a little over 2,000. This year, I think we're about 1,900 to date. I can't recall off the top of my head where we are in fiscal year 11. But we don't have a significant number of more runs. So by increasing the Medicare plus 80 to 120 to 200, Sander estimated last year when we went from 80 to 120 that we're going to pick up an additional 60,000 as a result of just that. This year he's estimating that we'll pick up, I think, an additional 169, 180, going from Medicare 120 to Medicare 200. At some point in time, Medicare, I think, is going to, and I think he said this last year, is going to pay so much. So again, I think we'll increase based on that, which is a good estimate, but if we don't have the SAFER grant, we'll have less calls, so we might have more revenue based on increasing our rates somewhat, but we may have less calls. So there's that factor that I think we all have to look at. And again, you know, this is my first time looking at 3 years worth of data, and I think Kenny and I agree that 1 month doesn't accurately portray. I mean, I know what he was trying to do in his report, trying to give a picture of, hey, heads up, warning, we lost some revenue here, potential revenue. But I think we really have to look at it over a period of years to get a true actual reflection. And I think the numbers of runs aren't going to change dramatically different unless we do something, if we have more development in town, or if we do that. In fact, we may lose some runs because I think we transport more out of town than we did before. Is that a fair statement? So
that hasn't historically resulted in lost runs.
Okay.
We should call back and staff out for it.
Okay. So again, I'm a great numbers person, and I can analyze data if it's presented to me, but I'm not a EMS coordinator. And I really believe that we've got to seriously look down and see what works for the city of Gloucester. And I stand by my recommendation to have someone come in and put all parties at the table and really hash this thing out so we can figure out what's best for the community, what's best to provide service to the community, and look at the numbers and say what makes sense. I don't think anybody really looks at it right now and says adding a Rescue 3 makes sense for the city. Will it someday? Maybe if we have more runs. So I don't know. I think that's my response to your question.
May I, Mr. Chairman? And I agree with you. In looking at FY12, I think we do need to do that kind of analysis, and certainly should, and we have time to do that. I'm more concerned right now about the balance of FY11. I think it's a reasonable assumption that if we had plus 43 turf calls in April, those aren't going to go down in May and June. I mean, we're going to have more people, more traffic, more opportunities. So the question is, can we fund for the next 2 months, transfer funds in to cover enough overtime to bring that number back down to average, to make sure, to maintain adequate staffing, and essentially it's a break even. I mean, as near as I can tell, we might make a little money, we might lose a little money, but we're not going to, it's not going to cost us a ton of money based on the fact that we will not have, let's say, 43 additional turf runs that we could have gotten something out of. Even at 80% collection and at a lower rate, it ought to pay the overtime bill for a couple of months.
Okay, I think there's two pieces to that. One would be that if it doesn't make us a tremendous amount of money, but I have to utilize and fund resources where I'm already going to be carrying forward probably a $400,000 snow and ice budget rather than a $300,000 snow and ice budget, and I'm saying that every single available dollar that we have typically that, we'll be speaking with Council President Hardy to try to make sure that we have that end of year meeting where we can do the transfers to clean up as much of the snow and ice deficit as we can with remaining balances that are left. So I'm going to take money out of someplace else in your scenario, put it to the fire department, not bring probably much of that revenue in fiscal year 11. Again, we may bill it out, but we're not probably going to collect most of that until fiscal year 12. Yeah, it'll be 1 year versus another, but I don't think it's going to help your bottom line. So I think you're going to have more expenses this year based on the scenario you just presented, but not the offsetting revenue to come into the general fund this year. So I think that would be a negative for the city at this point in time. Now, I think freeing up some of the excess lag money that's in the fund now is what the fire department's saying let's use that. And again, my point goes back to, we don't want the fire department to overspend the bottom line because we don't have the funds anywhere else in the budget in order to make that up. I mean, we're going to be really scraping the barrel this year and still have a snow and ice deficit to carry over $300,000 to $400,000. I hear your point. I just don't see that. I just don't see that that result is what's going to take place.
Listening tonight, the first thing I agree, I think we do need a third-party person to come in here and go over these figures, because whoever you get the figures from, they're going to vary. But I also want to say that I don't think you need to be a Harvard-trained CPA to figure out that if the ambulance is parked in the barn, that it's not going to make any, that it's going to make money for us. It's not going to make any money for us. You're not going to make money with those ambulances parked. They have to be out doing what they do. And the point that you made that it's going to be $200,000 in the red because of unpaid bills or whatever the situation is. One of the expectations that taxpayers have is that when they call 911, that somebody's going to come, and having those ambulances working and the fire department working. That's part of paying taxes in the city of Gloucester. Not everything in the city has to be an enterprise fund in order to pay for itself. It just doesn't work that way. That's part of paying the real estate taxes. If one of the solutions in order to shift some money around is the deficit ice account, snow and ice, maybe we need to carry a little bit more over the next year, and then when it comes, you have your free cash. Then possibly that's where we can finish it off next year. I know that the administration will probably be looking forward to some free cash, and a lot of times they have more discretion in spending that free cash than going through the council. But there's a solution right there, and I think it should be looked into. That crunch time, $55,000 for one paramedic and 110, and you're keeping the ambulance is parked in the barn, that's crazy. No businessman would ever invest that kind of money in a piece of equipment and have it sitting there not making any type of revenue.